So a little bit of a detour. I'm here to talk to you about the impact of audio and why that should be important to you. Now with that said, I am the CEO of iHeartMedia, and it's an audio first company, so I'm sure there's some bias here, but I'll try to keep it to the facts. And so here we go. The first one up here is just something you may not know. There's been a pretty big change in the landscape the last 5 years. And this is a work study that just talks about, it's a global research firm looking at time spent. And if you look at that, there's 31% of all media time is spent daily with audio. And that should probably surprising to a lot of you because when they do surveys, most people think it's probably most marketers. It's their job to know, but most marketers think it's about 15%. There's 31% time spent with audio. If you look at the other groups, it wouldn't surprise you. If you looked 5 years ago, linear TV was about 35. It's down to 24. I think people say, yeah, that's probably right. It's gone down as a result of the fragmentation and getting clobbered by the streamers, that's gone down. You'd expect digital, video, and social all to be going up. But audio, why did audio go up? It's like in the 23% 4 or 5 years ago, and it's gone up. There's been a few things. The most surprising thing, especially in a room full of technology-first people, is the resiliency of broadcast radio. It's kind of just held. Where broadcast and other platforms have gone down, broadcast radio is held where it reaches about 90% of the US on a monthly basis. It's just crazy. I mean, as an audio company, about 15 years ago, we launched the app thinking everything was going to go digital, and here we are 15 years later. We have, have a pretty robust digital audience, but broadcast has stayed the same. Second thing that happened is the explosion of podcasts. So about 5 years ago, we bought the largest independent podcast company. Stuff Media at the time was 50 million downloads a month. It's now about 400 million downloads a month. What's happened is 5 years ago, there's about 50 million US listeners that would tune into podcasts. It's now 120 million. It is the next mass medium. That only happens every few decades. But it is now 120. It's surpassed all other audio companies except for broadcast radio as the number 2. It surpassed audio streaming. That's been the explosion. The third thing that's probably happened, why audio has gone up, is just headphones. We've become a headphone nation. You can't go around without seeing headphones in everybody's ears, and it's become a convenience factor. So it's wherever you go, it's just at the end of the day, convenience pretty much, and any business wins, and it's convenient and easy to consume audio. So we've seen, whether you're streaming music, you're listening to a podcast, your favorite station, or whatever else, you can't go anywhere without seeing the podcast. It's been the number 1 electronic selling item for the last 5 years. And so what's happened, audio consumption has gone up at the expense of peace and quiet. It hasn't replaced something else, it's replaced your peace and quiet. So I don't know, some of you may think that's a bad thing. For us, it's actually a good thing, but it is. That's where the listening has gone. And then the last thing on the time spent for audio is distribution partners like Amazon that decided to introduce Alexa in the home. And you now have consumption in the kitchen, in the living room, where it didn't exist before. Nobody was manufacturing radios anymore, right? And then along comes Alexa. And so it makes it just the consumption, obviously went up as a result of that. One of the things you might notice is why didn't the revenue? Like the revenue is pretty far down, so why is the consumption so far up and the revenue down? One of it is the misperception of how much audio consumption there is and how marketers and how brands can benefit from that. That's number one. The second thing is there was, again, won't surprise anybody in this room, is there was just this mass rush to digital, 10 years ago. Like the appeal and the allure of targeting and the fact that I can hit exactly who I want to and I can get so much rich data back, like why wouldn't I? And by the way, you should. Everybody should benefit from that rich data. But there is a lot of debate from some of the biggest companies in the world like P&G, the largest ad spender in the world, that says, hey, we over-targeted. As a result of our over-targeting, we're hitting the same customer over and over again, and all of our competitors are, and we're not getting the incrementality that we're looking for. A perfect example of that, the CMO of Anheuser-Busch, who targets men 21-34. That's their target, and that's all their media is targeted at men 21-34. 70% of their sales are outside of that demo. So if you target men 21-34, you're not talking to 70% of your customers. And by the way, that's not an isolated example. Almost every company out there, whoever they're targeting, a majority of their customers are outside of their target, which was meant to be just a buying, parameter or guide. Groceries, same way. Target women 25-54, 60% of their sales are outside of that demo. So a lot of people are saying, I need that rich data. It's going to inform and help make the decisions, but we've probably gone too far. And so you've got companies that are now saying, going to continue to benefit from the targeting, but need what is that mass reach vehicle that's going to allow me to get that incrementality. Does that make sense? The third thing, this one's really interesting, and hearing you talk about the brain, Jen, you might want to come up here and join me on this one, is the sight, sound, and motion. Like there's marketers like, I have to have sight, sound, and motion. I have to. Audio, I believe you, the 31%, but if I'm going to be effective, I need the sight, sound, and motion component to it. And science would disagree. The science of sound is that sound is the most powerful sense for emotional connection. And it's activated in the amygdala and the hippocampus, which are areas of the brain associated with recall and emotions. And so, which is what marketers want. Marketers and companies, all the companies you represent at the end of the day, you're wanting an emotional connection. You're wanting for people to care enough about your company that they will lean in at the end of the day. And this is the area that it's activated in. And the last one, emotion and repetition, which is where media companies like myself and others come in. You provide enough repetition with that emotional connection to, impact recall. Now, where this comes, it's like, okay, that's a lot of words up there, Greg. What exactly does that mean? I'm going to ask you for just a second, think about your pet. Okay, all of you stop down for 1 second and just think about your pet. If you don't have a pet, think about your favorite vacation spot. Everybody has a favorite vacation spot here, right? Now, by me saying that, and he says, well, that wasn't visual, that was audio. It was visual too, because you created a visual image in your brain. Your brain is the fastest production company that exists. And I just created about 100 different customized visual ads, in a matter of 5 seconds of just talking to you. That's where the emotional connectivity, and you had some kind of emotional reaction to it if you liked your pet. Well, good or bad, right? You had an emotional reaction to it, and the vacation spot at the same time. That's the power of sound, is that there is visual imagery that embeds into your long-term memory structure because you've made it about me. And so it doesn't mean that visual ads aren't impactful too. It's just saying you don't need visual ads to be visual. Sounds weird, but because your brain's going to naturally do it for you. Does that make sense? That to me is fascinating, and it's also pretty interesting when AI, and we'll bring it together at the end. The opportunities that exist with AI for customization, very low production, just from audio, to connect with audiences in a different way on whatever platform you're using in sound. It doesn't have to be video every time. The next one, so that's kind of the landscape overall, why sound should be on a very high level, should be important to you, is that if 31% of your customers or your businesses are spending time with audio, then you should figure out a way, whether it's with my company or some other company, to engage in audio because it has an impact, and it's only growing. It's gone from, like I said, about 23% to 31% over the last few years. So that's the neighborhood of audio. Here's the house of iHeart. I'm going to take a second, and again, this is the company that I have and that I manage. Here's our ecosystem and kind of where we live in it. There is the broadcast side of it that everybody is like, okay, that's yesterday's news. It is yesterday's news because it was big then. It continues to be. Like I mentioned earlier that we had, about 15 years ago we launched the app, and the app, we now have 170 million registered users on the app. We did it so people could listen whenever, wherever, however they wanted to. But what we really got out of it was this rich data, and data is today's currency. And since 50% of the people that listen on the app also listen on broadcast, we can take all of that data, run it through data science, and apply it and say, okay, what are the cohorts that are most important to you? And say we can apply that knowledge on a broad basis, a one-to-many basis instead of a one-to-one. But the broadcast continues to be kind of the foundation and the anchor, believe, that informs everything else. And in a world that's all technology driven and one-to-one, it's not sexy to go back on the broadcast side, but it's highly effective. And so most of our partners and stuff come in and want to come through the podcast door, which we're now up to about 400 million downloads a month. We're the largest podcast company publisher in the US by 2x. And the way that we grew on that, quite frankly, is open distribution. We don't care if you listen to our podcast on Spotify or on iHeart or on iTunes or whatever. And most creators like that because they want the most possible, users out there. Interesting thing about podcasts that you should know is it became the largest mass media, but most of the time when you grow that fast, your daily usage goes down. You've got volume, but you're compromised and you start losing daily usage because the Uber users are diluted. You now have a bunch of peripheral users come in, but it's not the Uber users. The interesting thing with podcasts is daily consumption has gone up. As it's gotten bigger, people have started consuming more podcasts per week too. And so it doesn't look like that's slowing down anytime soon. And so podcasts in a really good spot. I want to point out the social media. It's on the iHeart slide here, but I want to talk about it in general. When you think about broadcast and podcast, there's this parasocial relationships, this intimacy that exists between the listener, and they actually consider them a friend, and I'm going to talk about it on the next slide. The social media following is just an indicator here, and the reason I have this up here is to let you know that that relationship it extends beyond the conversation they're having on their primary platform because they consider a friend. So it continues into the social space, and you don't see that with other media platforms. It's really interesting, and I'm gonna talk about that a little bit more when we talk about conversation and our influencers. We do live events and listening platforms too. We're on the listening platforms. The main reason I have this up here for you is because today's consumer and where media is going is it's going to be platform agnostic. It's just about content. I'm going to follow the content because as a consumer, I don't really care. Nobody thinks what platform I'm going to be on. I'm just going to, so whether I'm consuming it, our content, listening on the car and the commute to work, or whether I'm listening on my headphones while I'm walking a dog, or I'm enjoying a concert on Fortnite, which we did last week with Ed Sheeran. You're just consuming it in a variety of ways, and today's consumer seamlessly goes. And quite frankly, they probably are, while they're watching the Ed Sheeran concert on Fortnite, also consuming other things at the same time. It's a multi-layered environment. This is an ego slide that I had to throw up there. So in case you wanted to win a bet tonight, because nobody would guess if I were to ask you what is your, who is the biggest ad-enabled monthly reach in the U.S., nobody in here would have guessed iHeart, Google, Facebook, everything else. But it's just a reminder that there's things in front of us and that others you just don't think about. And if you're looking for ways to access, when you start with 276 million, there's really no audience you can't hit. So if it's I want to reach moms, with kids under the age of 10, okay, we've got that. If you want, and so this is one of those things. If you want to win a bet tonight, go ahead and ask that question. Or hopefully, if you're asking somebody else in here, you don't win the bet, because that means I totally lost you and none of you were listening. This is probably the most interesting thing as it relates to our platforms, and it relates to also, how people interact with sound and the relationship that you have in the audio, in particular podcast and broadcast, is that at the end of the day, we believe that we are in the conversation business. And that conversation business that we have is how we connect. It's interesting that we're talking about AI, and there's a lot of things that we're considering in the AI space and how it can make us smarter and better and faster and everything else. I know that there was on the first presentation, it's not smarter, it's just faster. And I agree with that, but there's a lot of ways that we can get smarter in how we use it faster. But there's also for us, what we don't want to lose is that human connection. And so how do we bring AI into our business? How do we bring all of the benefits of AI, whether it's, Ryan, I think that you're talking here in a little bit, whether it's text to voice to text, voice to voice, it opens up all kinds of opportunities. with AI, how do we preserve and protect the authenticity that we have between our hosts too, and not compromise that, that relationship? And you may say, what exactly are you talking about? I'll give you some real examples. So, translation technology, that we've been talking to your group about too, Ryan, is like, we've got this unbelievable portfolio of podcast talent, and it should be available in Mandarin. It should be available in Korean. It should be available in Spanish and French and everything else. And it's really the cost compared to the availability when you think, why don't we have Jay Shetty available in every language across in the world? Because he is a global personality with incredible things. Why don't we have Malcolm Gladwell and his insights also in our network available across every language? Why don't? You can do that now. The question is, when you start putting them in other languages, and they lose a little bit of control, and you have them, or if I take a Ryan Seacrest and I say, hey Ryan, you don't have available, you're not available to voice for 20 different clients across the country, but we can use AI to actually represent your voice. It's like, I lose a little bit of the control. It would be amazing from a marketing standpoint, but are you now compromising that relationship and that trust that you have with the audience? And so we struggle a little bit, with where we're going on that. But we know that we're going to be able to use it in really effective ways too. We were talking to a major supermarket retailer. By the way, I don't see the time. Where am I on time? It's not up there. 2 minutes? So we're talking to a major supermarket retailer. AI is going to change the way that they're able to market, because now they can have 160 different pieces of copy without having to go through a production nightmare that is a barrier both from a cost standpoint and just a logistics standpoint. So I can really pivot quickly to do avocados in California and oranges in Florida, and my bakeries business in the Northeast, and be able to change that on a dime. And so there's a lot of good things that we're going to be able to lean into AI on, but that we also want to make sure that we're not compromising that human touch. And when I go back to the human touch, and I'll close on this, our listeners to podcast and to broadcast, 70% of them consider the host their friend. They spend an hour a day with them. And so there is a relationship that is like the most effective form of advertising of word of mouth. But instead of me having to deliver 1-to-1, it's 1 to 10,000 at a time. And that listener on the end feels like you're talking to me only. Like Ryan will tell a story, one of our Seacrest, one of our hosts, will tell a story. He was at dinner at Ago on Melrose with Selena Gomez. He's having dinner, and he says, this is not uncommon. Up runs a fan with a phone and says, oh my gosh, I'm such a huge fan. Can I get a picture? And Ryan and Selena looked at it. Yeah, of course. And then she proceeds to hand the camera to Ryan and go over and get the picture with Selena. And it's just, and he says, come. And he says it's the greatest compliment ever, because the person leaves and Selena says, did you know her? And he said, no. But at the end of the picture, the person that came over said, I can't believe you said that on Ryan's Roses this morning. I mean, there's no way. That guy was in the wrong. I can't believe you let him off the hook. And it's just this relationship. That exists with our podcast and our broadcast. That's that relationship that is the trust that happens inside of audio. So we know that AI and everything that everybody's been talking about on the first panels, and I'm sure we're going to hear on future, we know that there is advancements that we're going to make in show prep, in production, in creative, where you said we see a huge opportunity in just creative opportunities as a result of AI. We see all the benefits that come with AI. The one place that we're cautious is we don't want to compromise the trust and the relationship that we have with our listener, that our hosts have with our listeners in particular. So there's places that we're going to benefit and places that we're going to tiptoe in and see how the response is. Okay? All right, I think that's it for me. Thank you guys.